to catch a glimpse of your face. God, you captivate our gaze. Move us, God, come remove what hinders us from drinking in your grace. God, we come with our hearts unfurled. God, we come with our hearts unfurled. Every morning your mercies new rise to meet us. Steadfast love. Every sunset your faithfulness all around us. Steadfast love of God. Open us like a bird's wings, so free, unfettered by the past. Still us, Spirit, come fill us. Divine union unsurpassed. God, we come with our hearts unfurled. God, we come with our hearts unfurled. Every morning your mercies new rise to meet us. Steadfast love. Every sunset your faithfulness all around us. Steadfast love of You are holding us together, God who was and is to come. Just sing that with us. You are holding us together, God who was and is to come. Oh, you are holding us together, God who was and is to come. You are holding us together, God who was and is to come. Every morning your mercies new rise to meet us. Steadfast love. Every sunset your faithfulness around us. Steadfast love.
Good morning, Watershed. Welcome. We're so glad to have you here. If you're checking in with us online, just feel free to tell everybody where you're checking in from. We're so glad you're here. Let's just take a moment, just say hi to your neighbor, and we'll just have you stand and join and sing with us here in just a moment.
Lord, I find you in the doubt.
skies. Make your way right before me in your light. I will find all I need. All I need is you. My glorious light, I will go where you shine. Make the dawn crack the skies. Make your way right before me in your light. I will find all I need. All I need is you. Oh, how I need you. Oh, how I need you.
Well, good morning. You can be seated. My name is Matt, and I'm one of the pastors here at Watershed. If you're brand new with us this morning, I want to say welcome. Thank you for coming out of your very cool living space and sweating profusely while you were over here. Hopefully this is a nice environment. And if anyone is outside this morning, you are the MVP of Watershed today. If you're sitting out, yeah, give them a round of applause. Is there anybody out there? One person. Who is it? Who is it, Scott? Wait for it. What? Jose. Give it up for Jose outside. Yes, yes. Well, we're glad that you're here. If you're outside, inside, following us alongside of us, or following us on YouTube or Facebook this morning, welcome. Just a few things that I want to make you aware of as you move into this week and really throughout the rest of the summer, or as more things are unfolding. A couple of things. First of all, on August 21st, that's when Charlotte celebrates Pride, and Watershed over the past several years has been a part of that activity, that event. We kind of all get together and head in that direction and walk in the parade. And if you're planning on doing that, we want to encourage you to buy a t-shirt as a part of that experience. There's a QR code on the screen. There's shirts in the lobby. It's a real easy way to pay, or go out, and if you want to talk to Mark Smith, who I think is manning the table out there today, would love you not just to be a part of the parade, but then also buy some of the gear and represent as we go together. That's August 21st, and of course the t-shirts are out there right now. Also, next Saturday, if you're a parent of a student, a rising sixth grader all the way through senior high, there's a student event here from 6 to 9 next week. You probably already know that if you should have received something via email about that event. Just want to make a reminder there. And then also next Sunday, the 31st, from like 11:20, right after what happens in here, from like 11:20 to 11:30, 11:35-ish, David and Blair's our kids pastor, David is our student pastor, are pulling any family members of kids through students together. There's an announcement they want to make about the fall and about the future of student ministry and kids ministry and family ministries here at Watershed. It's really an important announcement. I'm going to be there. I'm excited about what they're going to share. So if you're a parent or if you're a kid and want to come, that would be great. It's actually going to be in the preface room, which is down the greenhouse hall, and it's the first door on the left. So down this hall, first door on the left. And again, we'll remind you next Sunday. Also, if you've been around Watershed for a while, you probably were made aware of the loss that we experienced as a community over the past week. Tina Sagisi, who has been a part of Watershed, I think maybe the first year she came. Is that right, Scott? First or second year? Something along those lines. The first Sunday she came, the next Sunday she came back, and she started volunteering in Greenhouse. And for the last 15, 16 years, she's been this force, this relational force with our kids. This past week, unexpectedly, she passed away. And so next Sunday, after our gathering, from about 11:30 to about noon-ish, there's going to be some light refreshments, and then around noon, we're going to spend some time just remembering her and celebrating her. And if you've never met her, you should come, because the stories are going to be incredible. And if you knew Tina, we hope you can stick around and be a part of that as well. Also, you may have noticed luggage as you're coming in at either the table or in the back of the auditorium. That's one of the projects that we're a part of through Bethany Christian Services. Bethany Christian Services is an organization that helps children who have been separated from their families at the border. They offer fostering environments, foster care through families here locally in Charlotte until they can be reunified with their family members. They're averaging 2, 3, 4 of these a month being reunified. I think they're up to maybe 25 or 30 families so far this year. And they've asked for 2 things. First of all, they've asked for luggage so that those kids, as they get reconnected with their family, they actually have something that they can carry their belongings with them to the reunification. But more recently, they're asking for pajamas, summer pajamas. They're kind of having a shortage right now. And if you go to this QR code, it actually takes you to the spaces that allow you to see the needs Actually, if you want to order them through Amazon so that they come right here, you can do that, or you can go out and purchase these sorts of things and either bring them on a Sunday or drop them off at our Watershed staff house, which is at the end of this building on the other side of the parking lot. All of this happens every week. Watershed is doing the work of Watershed, and in part, it's because of not just the relational energy and the relational time that's put towards this community, but also because so many folks here take seriously their generosity towards Watershed. Every month, we try to bring on new recurring giving families or households, as it would be, to continue to create the stability and allow our staff and our leadership to dream about what's going to happen in the future. And so if you're willing to be a part of the ongoing, recurring, generous flow of this community, you can do that by, again, logging into the QR code here, and or you can give in the back. There's secure, there's metal box in the back if that's something that you would prefer doing, like almost going old school and writing a check. You can do that in the back, and there's other ways to give as well through matching donor gifts through your workplace. In fact, I was at Starbucks before I came over here, just kind of having some coffee and collecting my thoughts, so to speak, and two people came in and said, "Hey, just so you know, my workplace matches my generosity, and it's going to start flowing towards Watershed." So that's another option. And if you have more that you want to know about that, you can email me, Matt@watershed.charlotte.com, or Scott@watershed.charlotte.com. Thank you for being here this morning. We're in the second week of a series called Textuality, and just in light of all that's going on in the world today, our hope is that there's some sense of openness in your heart to hear the thing that you need to hear the thing that God is attempting to maybe whisper to you or to allow you to see that would make a difference in your life. And may that be true for all of us. Thanks.
I don't know about you, but sometimes there are weeks where there aren't any easy answers, and sometimes you feel very alone. We have a thing that we do here at Watershed, What is Saving You Now? And some weeks, I'm not really sure what the answer is to that question. This week's been a hard week. But sometimes salvation of the things we're going through, it's not just really straightforward. Sometimes it's in these little constants that we sometimes forget are there. Barbara Brown Taylor says salvation is a word for the divine spaciousness that comes to human beings in all the tight places where their lives are at risk, regardless of how they got there or whether they even know God's name. Sometimes it comes as extended human hand, sometimes as a bolt from the blue, but either way, it opens a door in what looked for all the world like a wall. This is the way of life, and God alone knows how it works. And sometimes I've just got to hold on to something that won't move. It's a willingness to keep walking into the next day, open to whatever may turn out to be true that day.
When the best of me is barely breathing, when I'm not somebody I believe in, hold on to me. When I miss the light, the night is stolen. When I'm slamming all the doors you've opened, hold on to me. Hold on to me. Hold on to me when it's too dark to see you. When I am sure I have reached the end. Hold on to me when I forget I need you. When I let go, hold me to break in desperation underneath the weight of expectation. Hold on to me. Hold on to me. Hold on to me when it's too dark to see you. When I am sure I have reached the end. Hold on to me when I forget I need you. When I let go, hold me again. I could rest here in your arms forever, 'cause I know nobody loves me better. Hold on to me. Hold on to me.
That's very bright. Morning. Hello. My name's David, one of the pastors here on staff. I'm going to talk at you for about 35 minutes here, just to set some expectations for what the next little bit's going to look like. Like Matt said a moment ago, this is week 2 of a series called Textuality. And the basic idea here is that many of us were raised in contexts where we were exposed to the Bible, to the Christian scriptures, the Jewish scriptures, and we were handed down a certain way of understanding stories, passages, verses, things like that. And perhaps at some point, maybe this is the reason that you're here at a place like Watershed this morning, perhaps at some point, what we were handed, what we were given, stopped working the same way. It stopped being meaningful to us or for us in the same way that it was framed or pitched to us. In many instances, maybe that was a gradual thing, sort of like a growing up over time. In other instances, maybe it was kind of traumatic, kind of sudden. An experience maybe like whiplash or something like that. And so the hope or the purpose of the series is to really lean into one of our pathways, our values here, which is reclamation, to reclaim, not just toss out the scripture, the passages, the parts of the Bible that don't work for us anymore, but to translate them, to contextualize them. Because really what the Bible is it's a wrestling, a struggling with an encounter with what we might call God or the divine. And in context, when the Bible was written thousands of years ago, over the course of thousands of years, the only language, the only categories, the only concepts that the authors had to describe were ones that were appropriate for their contexts. Well, their context is very different than our context. And so what does it look like to contextualize or to translate their encounter with the divine to our world and to our time? Because translation isn't just, what is the English word for this Hebrew word, or what is the English word for this Greek word, there's more to it than just the language element. There's assumptions and sort of these kind of foundations about how the world works that are different for us than it was for them. So there's more complexity to it, more nuance, and that's what this series is about. And so when it comes to things that maybe we were handed, maybe we grew up with that don't work the way that they used to, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking like, okay, beyond the Bible, beyond Scripture, what are some things that I was handed that didn't really necessarily like play out the way that I thought they would as a child? A big one that I kept coming back to was, well, do you all know who I'm talking about if I say Scruff McGruff? All right? You know, Scruff McGruff, Chicago, Illinois, 60652 or something like that. You were supposed to write it. He's an anthropomorphic dog, by the way. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can YouTube, Google this, whatever. He's like a dog in a trench coat, and like a basset hound. And he wants you to help him take a bite out of crime. And so the scenarios that Scruff would present to you, this was like during the commercial break between like Rugrats and Hey Arnold. What Scruff would do is he would give you a scenario, a scenario where your like deviant friend who in my headcanon didn't know Jesus. And the deviant friend, you'd go over to the deviant friend's house and you'd be like, hey, let's play with like super soakers. But then he would pull out a real gun. And Scruff's comic books that you would order from him if you mailed that address would teach you like how to respond in that moment. I had a few. Never got to really put them into practice. Maybe that's a privilege thing. So there was that. Stop, drop, and roll. I don't want to like trigger anyone who's encountered fire intimately, but I mean, that's still what I would do if I were to combust, but it just, the degree to which it was like imprinted upon me, I was just expecting to use it more frequently. And I haven't had to. What else? Those were some big ones. Dare in general didn't turn out the way I thought it would. The point is, what I'm getting at is the kind of anxiety that I was handed as a child and as an adolescent, that's not the same anxiety I have now. Another big one that I had, and this is where we kind of get to the text stuff, is salvation anxiety. So maybe this is relatable. Just this overwhelming fear that really got compounded every time I went to summer camp. This just compounding fear that like I didn't say the magic words correctly, and I didn't think I was going to die. Let me clarify. That took a turn, I know. But what I thought was going to happen actually was that I was going to wake up one day and like everyone in my house was going to have disappeared. If you're new to this whole Christianity thing, there's this weird idea called the Rapture. And that was actually a candidate for me as far as like, oh, what should we reclaim? There's no reclaiming the rapture. It's not happening. It's not real. It's in sort of the schema of Christian history, doctrinal development over a couple thousand years, it came late. It's like some fan fiction that someone added much, much later in like the 1800s. And it's just a really, really, really bad translation of some ideas. Anyway, don't worry about the rapture. It's not happening. No one's going to be left behind. But I was scared of that. And so my fear was that I would be left behind, that my family would go to heaven, because that's what the rapture was Jesus was going to come back in some way, and all the good Christians were going to disappear, and all of the bad people were going to be left behind for like locust helicopter monsters to sting to death or something. Terrifying, right? And so I prayed a prayer, some version of repentance, asking Jesus into my heart, physics of which are odd. just to be safe, like over and over again, and wrestling with the fact that I was told that it's like once saved, always saved, and then that even raised this bigger question of, wait a second, what am I being saved from? Am I being saved from the scorpion monsters from Revelation, the book of Revelation? Am I being saved from the devil, from Satan? Usually it was I was being saved from myself, my own adolescent wickedness, whatever that looked like. And so I had a lot of salvation anxiety. Now as an adult, I don't, and if you still do, I hope maybe something around this series will help you with that. Spoiler alert, by the way, this is sort of like a two-part series. Sean is going to be speaking next week. That'll be epic. But I like bookend Sean, and so in 2 weeks I'm going to be talking about spiritual warfare. So I wanted to choose what are the most triggering topics I could choose. So I chose salvation, namely the Romans road. That's where we're going in a second. Spoiler alert. And spiritual warfare. I was like, oh yeah, that'll elicit some eye rolls and maybe some gag reflex responses in the audience. But no. Now I have different anxieties. So as a kid, I was worried about being saved from fire, deviant friends, and whatever God was saving me from. Now as an adult, it's way worse. My anxiety is of a totally different nature. I'm scared of my kids. I'm scared for my kids. I'm scared of what I might do, not to my kids, what I might do to break my kids by accident. Best of intentions. I'm scared of, I'm so scared of how hot it is outside, and that we are on a course where that's how it's going to be always, which also relates to my kids. I'm scared of one medical emergency that we won't be able to come back from financially. I'm scared of so it's hard to narrow it down, the kind of things that I have anxiety over now as an adult. And so when I asked myself, what does salvation look like? It was very simple back then. It was very simple. It was this kind of abstract, esoteric thing. I'm being saved from, this spiritual thing, sin in some way. And now salvation looks more political, more financial, more global, terrestrial. It looks more communal. So when I came to the task of looking at what is, at least in evangelicalism, which is where I grew up, fun place, in that world, when it came to looking at something called the Romans road, does anyone know? Do y'all know what I'm talking about with the Romans road? I'm going to explain it if you don't. I'm just wondering if this is terminology that you were given, probably in bad cartoons on a piece of paper, maybe in a parking lot, called a tract. Someone handed it to you and it was terrifying. Anyway, you're confused. I'll explain. So what the Romans road was a sort of 4 verses, 5 really, in the book of Romans that were meant to sort of, this was the path to salvation. But the salvation I was talking about before, the scary, spiritual, abstract salvation. So when I was thinking about what I feel like I need salvation from today, largely mental health related, like anxiety, depression, crippling fear of ruining future generations and things like that. As I looked at the Romans road, at least how it was presented to me growing up, it fell about as flat as Scruff McGruff. So what I want to do today is sort of with you try to understand it a little bit differently. So even if you haven't heard the terminology Romans road, most of you, I would venture to guess, have probably heard some of the verses. We'll go through them in a moment here. There's Romans 3:23. There's Romans 5:8, Romans 6:23. That was always convenient for memorization purposes. 23 was in both of them. And then Romans 10:9 through 10. And so the whole basic idea was like, you had to accept this initial premise, which you're going to find in Romans 3:23, that you're a sinner, and something about that necessitates a kind of salvation. And so the subsequent verses, subsequent passages, were basically your pathway, your basic instructions, your instruction manual, I guess, as to how to save yourself or get saved or let Jesus save you, depending on your denomination, from your inherent wickedness. So let's dive right in. Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Y'all heard that verse before? Yeah. So the way that this was pitched to me, was in the terms of a concept called total depravity. And the idea there was that even the best of us, the Mother Teresas, the Gandhis, fill in the blank with whoever you admired growing up, at least ethically, it didn't matter. It didn't matter about all our good intentions, good deeds. Ultimately, at the core, we have sinned, we were sinners, we inherited this from Adam and Eve or something. It doesn't make sense. And because of this, we are separate from God. Taking a step back and looking at this, kind of with new eyes, with better context, there's a few things I want to say about it. First, this verse was never presented to me in the context of the verses that came literally right before it or literally right after it. So what is Paul, the dude who wrote this? Paul gets a bad rap, by the way. He's, everyone's like, Paul, I like Jesus, but this Paul guy, he doesn't like women and gay people. In fairness to Paul, he didn't know any gay people. Now, let me clarify. Paul definitely knew people who were attracted to others of the same sex, but the whole concept of being gay, LGBTQIA identity, that would have been completely foreign to Paul. So anytime we think we see Paul condemning LGBTQIA identity the way we understand it now, that was the furthest thing from his mind, all right? So anytime people are like, well, look at this verse from this book that Paul wrote, it's not what Paul's talking about. And some of the worst things that Paul allegedly said about women, that was someone writing in Paul's name. 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus. I'm kind of going off on a little tangent here, but I'm trying to redeem Paul a little bit. Whoever wrote Timothy, not whatever, we can just kind of punt that book. But Paul did write Romans. Yeah, welcome to Watershed. We'll reclaim Timothy in a few years. Right now we're working on Romans. Romans, Paul did write. And the context for Romans is that Paul is trying to make sense of a conundrum, a challenge. A lot of his people, the people of Israel, have rejected Jesus, have rejected the gospel message. And so he's trying to hold in tension the fact that there's this promise, this covenant that the people of Israel felt they had with God, this promise that they were going to be redeemed and restored. And crucially, this isn't like redeemed and restored in the afterlife or in heaven or something like that. Crucially, this was redeemed and restored like in a socio-political sense. Like the whole fact that the Romans were ruling them, oppressing them, that this imperial power was subjecting them to taxation, to limitations as the way they practiced their faith and their religion, that didn't cohere with the promises that they'd been given, hundreds or thousands of years earlier. And so their notion of being saved, of a Messiah coming, was that this Messiah was going to come and liberate them politically and put them back in their rightful place as sort of God's representatives here on earth that everyone else was sort of going to look to, perhaps even adhere to or submit to as sort of like God's representatives or regents, on the earth. And clearly that wasn't happening. And clearly, at least from the perspective of many Jewish people, Jesus wasn't that. As far as they were concerned, the Romans killed that guy. He's old news. So there's this rejection of what Paul understands the gospel to be, and then there's all of these other non-Jewish people, these other Roman citizens, these Greeks, these people from other parts of the world that were not of Jewish ethnic descent who were embracing the gospel and were accepting it. And so there was right from the beginning in Christianity, there was these disagreements. It wasn't even called Christianity back then, by the way. Paul very much saw what he was doing as existing within Judaism. He thought he was having a intra-religious dialogue with other Jewish adherents, okay? So that's what Romans is about, is Paul is trying to reconcile and, in fact, argue with, honestly, probably James, Jesus' brother who wrote the book of James. Romans is probably a polemic against that guy. So off to a great start as far as the unity within the budding Christian religion. But they're sort of arguing with each other. And Paul's point is to both hold in tension a certain privileging of Jewish identity, of Jewish heritage, of the promises, the covenants that God had with the Jewish people, and a sort of universalizing invitation, universality that Jesus offers, that the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus brings about, okay? So literally the verse just prior to this, I don't have it on the screen, you can look it up in the Bible that I know you own. Probably on your phone by now. But so the context is he's trying to flatten the differentiation between Jew and non-Jew, Jew and Gentile. And so when he says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, his point is not to hammer home a kind of inherent depravity that exists within you that makes you unlovable towards God. This was actually good news. It was an all equalizing statement of no, we are all on the same page in our relationship to God. There is no privileging here. Another one of the books that Paul definitely wrote, Galatians, talks about, there's no longer Jew, Greek, male, female. I don't remember some of the other categories he gets into, but the point is not to trivialize or collapse or not value these identities, but there is sort of a collective. There's a collective posture towards God that is universal to all of us. And I think there's something powerfully liberating about that, something powerfully liberating about the idea that when it comes to all of the differences that many of us experience, that the universal in us is a kind of lack, it's a kind of anxiety, it's a kind of tension that we all feel and are all trying to snuff out through our various consumeristic attempts. Because really, when it comes to sort of contextualizing this for our context and thinking about the things that we feel like we need to be saved from, our go-to to achieve that salvation in our day and age is usually spending money. Spending money on a new toy, like grown-up toy, spending money on some new information, some new knowledge, spending money on experiences, spending money on our image and our appearance. Sometimes the cheapest way to do that is, just through like Instagram, or something like that. But the point is, we are, our approach to the things that we feel like we need to be saved from, even if it doesn't look exactly like their approach way back then, maybe you see something common emerging, this common anxiety, this common lack, this common deficiency that we all feel that we're trying to cover over, that we're trying to fill, that we're trying to overcome. That's what Paul's talking about when he's talking about sin. So he moves on. Romans 5:8. Something like, while we were still sinners, or I don't think that's Romans 5:8. Well, don't worry about it. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong here. Well, we're going to go with it. I'll make this verse work. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. So the context of what Paul is doing here, what's going on, is that he's laying the groundwork for the posture that Jesus shows in dying on the cross. Now, again, a little bit more context. It didn't emerge immediately that Jesus' death on the cross was was salvatory or saving in the way that we understand it. Many of you were probably, whether you had this language or not, you were given this idea of penal substitutionary atonement, this idea that like because we're bad and God can't be around us, like he's allergic to us or something like that. This version of God was definitely a he. That Jesus has to come and like by dying somehow in some weird tribalistic way, that makes God like it's like an EpiPen or something like that, and now God is not allergic to us, so like God can be in our presence. This really weird idea. And so what Paul is kind of wrestling with in this passage is he's sort of naming the instances where, from a human perspective, we might actually, be willing to sacrifice ourselves. All right. So Paul lived in this sort of mythic world picture, worldview, where his understanding of what was happening here is that even though it seemed like the people of Israel were oppressed or sort of like under siege by the Romans were really sort of like a front, unbeknownst to them probably, but a front for evil spiritual forces that were oppressing the world. And so as Paul was trying to make sense of the cross, make sense of how Jesus could have died at the hand of the Romans, but actually was still the Messiah, was actually the one who was still going to liberate all of them from bondage, from oppression, the way that he sort of explained that, the way that he sort of understood that, was that it was sort of this bait and switch. That by seemingly being defeated by the forces of evil, Jesus actually sort of subversively went in there and conquered them, and then came back like victorious. All right, and so Paul is in this passage. He is wrestling with who us normal humans, us, regular folk, might be willing to sacrifice ourselves for. So he talks about the fact that, someone might sacrifice themselves for a friend or a loved one. Maybe a truly righteous individual would sacrifice themselves for someone that, there it is. God shows his love for us. Everything I'm saying will make a little more sense. God shows his love for us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Okay, so in this context, Paul is trying to make the pitch or make the argument that Christ didn't just die for the people that he liked. He didn't just die for his friends. Perhaps he is even greater on some level than what Paul would describe as a righteous man who would die for a cause or die for someone he didn't know very well. No, Christ died for all of us, and there's almost like a bold futility to this. All right, so like, have you ever been invited to something, and you're kind of like, well, who's gonna be there? Am I gonna have FOMO if I don't go? Or maybe you've been invited to give to something, invest in something, and quite understandably, you're kind of like, but is this gonna be here in like 2 years, or am I literally just throwing money away? There's you kind of want some kind of assurance that justifies your investment. And Paul is sort of saying that Christ kind of throws that caution to the wind. The whole idea here is that by dying for us, and again, remember, Paul has this very ancient sort of mythic understanding of what's going on here. We would want to recontextualize Jesus' death on the cross for our terms, because oftentimes, historically, this has sort of been used to sort of justify, justify being abused, or justify kind of sticking with it, when we're being oppressed. That's not at all what Paul is trying to say here. But for our purposes, kind of keeping in mind the first passage, the universality of sin, not as this grossness, not as this moral culpability, not as this thing that makes us repulsive to God, but as this sort of collective humanness, this collective messiness, this collective yearning that we have to fulfill ourselves. And knowing experientially, I think knowing historically, knowing, I think, universally across the human condition, all of our attempts to fulfill ourselves whether it's through the right relationship, through the right self-development or self-care, through the right purchases, through the right job, through the right title or identity, all of those fall short. They fall short of the kind of wholeness, of the kind of completion that we might identify with the being of God. So there is a futility when it comes to investment. There is kind of a futility when it comes to the ways that we attempt to save ourselves. Now here's the thing, a lot of those things aren't bad. Self-improvement, relationships, things like that, all good. But when we make those things ultimate things, when we make those things the things that are going to save us, what Paul is saying is they inevitably fall short. They might be a good thing, they might be a healthy thing, they might be an enjoyable thing, but we're still going to wake up the next day and wonder why we don't feel complete. So it's within that context of this kind of repetitive futility that he's coming in and saying, like, in spite of all that, in spite of that apparent futility, Christ was still like, sign me up, I'm in. I'm here for these people, all right? Then we move on to Romans 6:23, probably the next most famous one after 3:23. Yeah, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. So how this was probably pitched to you, certainly the way that it was pitched to me, is that sin, all the abstractly defined bad things we do, in the case of some of us, the identities that we have, and really in the case of all of us, according to this understanding of Romans and Paul, this sort of inherent badness that exists within us, what we deserve because of that is death. And of course, death was always abstracted. It wasn't just death, it was torture. Eternal torture, for all of forever, in hell. But God, because God is very merciful, comes in and does this weird bait and switch of Jesus, and, if we pray the right prayer, now we're good, okay? But remember, that's not how Paul understood sin. And that's not how the people of Israel understood death. What they were worried about wasn't merely their own physical death, because, by the way, death was very prominent for them relative to us. Life expectancy, when this was written, was like 28, all right? So, like, Jesus, we think, oh, Jesus, he died tragically at 33. Old dude. He lived a long, full life. Adults getting to their mid-20s, early 30s, like, that was a win. And kids getting to, like, adolescence, also a win. Like, they didn't have antiseptics. So, like, you get a splinter, you're probably dead. You stub your toe and it doesn't get cleaned properly, infection, probably dead. Like, very different relationship to death than we have. So we do this thing where we sort of like impose our kind of assumptions, our expectations, retroactively back. That's what this idea of reclamation is, this translation. It's not just translating the words, because the way that we hear those words is completely different than the way that they heard those words. So what's actually going on here? Well, if the way that we're understanding sin, the way that I'm telling you to understand sin, you're not going to get that very much at Watershed. Yes, think this way. That's what I'm doing right now. The way that we're understanding sin is that this collective universal longing, this yearning for wholeness, this desire to be like God, with the idea that God, whatever God might be, is this complete being, this being that exists in sort of self-sufficient completeness. And so we are constantly, really what we're doing is we're constantly sort of buying the lie that the serpent or the snake, that many of us have come to understood as Satan or the devil in the Garden of Eden story, promised Adam and Eve, which is, if you do this, if you know the difference between good and evil, if you fill your life with the things that are good and partition yourself off from all the things that are bad, you'll be whole, you'll be like God. So all of our attempts to save ourselves, what the Bible understands to be sin, is a response to that. If I can, live the right lifestyle, if I can be with the right people, if I can be identified with the right group, if I can hit the right net worth or tax bracket, I'll be whole. It's It's been the same lie from the beginning. It's idolatry, Our modern word for that might be ideology. What is the way that we can order our life to feel whole? There's all sorts of different ideologies out there about how you can go about doing that. And the wages of that thinking is death. Ultimately, the literal death in the sense that, we're all going to die, but it's death in the symbolic sense as well. It's not going to work. All right, we're going to keep spinning. And again, many of those things are perfectly good things that we should feel completely free and fine to pursue, but they're not going to save us if what we mean by being saved is experiencing this ultimate wholeness that we identify with God. And so, God's gift to us is eternal, maybe a bad translation, maybe a better way of translating that word would be abundant or divine. Maybe the most literal way that we can translate that word, eternal, would be the life of the ages. So what is being offered here is a more authentic, a more divine, more free way of being human than this repetitive death drive of sin that we achieve when we try to save ourselves, all right? So how do we get that? That's a nice gift, but what does it look like to actually achieve that? We come to the end of the Romans road. Romans 10, 9 and 10, which says, if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, if you believe in your heart, this is the salvation anxiety, pray the sinner's prayer or whatever, that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. So if I haven't lost you already, which is very likely that I have, but if I haven't lost you already, this is probably where I'm going to lose you, so please forgive me. But, so what does it mean? What does it mean to declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead? Growing up, that was simply a profession of faith. It was a mental sort of cognitive assent and some magic incantation that we were taught at summer camp. And once you did that, you were good. Now, based on everything I've said about this pursuit of wholeness that we are all addicted to, is it any wonder that didn't feel like it did anything? That didn't make you feel whole and complete in whatever saved might be? It's just words. There was no sort of changed being. There was no there was no inner transformation, right? And so often the response in more traditional Christian contexts was, well, it's not works, which would be like good deeds or something like that, and then faith, but the evidence of you actually being changed will be you changing your behavior or something like that. But I don't think that really would land it or gets at it either, because there's still that sense of striving, still that sense of, there's got to be something more. But and if you actually read Romans in its whole context, this is much clearer. I'm trying to make sense of these, 4 cherry-picked verses that evangelicals use, so forgive me and show me grace, thank you. But Paul's whole argument is to sort of subvert what our expectations about what God is like, or what a Lord would even be like. So to declare that Jesus is Lord is to assent to the idea that God identifies with this person who was executed by an oppressive state. To accept, to believe that God raised Jesus from the dead is to sort of defiantly declare that that's not the last word on things. As Paul goes on in some of his other letters, increasingly this idea of salvation is tied to this other idea, very big in the Bible, of resurrection. Yes, band. That is the cue. They weren't sure. I wasn't sure if that was going to be the cue, so I wanted to make it really explicit for them. But so this idea of resurrection, which we take very literally as dying and rising back from the dead, but I'm not sure if at least that most literal kind of straightforward sense is the best way for us to understand this. I'll put it this way. You've probably heard, the sort of apocryphal quote attributed to Martin Luther King Jr. about the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice, yes? Okay. I don't know if that's true. There are constant instances where if sort of left to its own devices, the universe doesn't, and any physicist will tell you this, the universe doesn't trend towards justice, it trends towards entropy, towards chaos, towards fire. People, you might hear people talk about the heat death of the universe, which feels imminent at the moment. But what the trajectory of the universe might bend towards, might trend towards, is resurrection. And here's what I mean by that. There's something I think profoundly true, profoundly observable, profoundly experienceable, if that's a word, about the fact that when things die, something is revealed, something new is sort of born from the ashes. We see that in the plant world, where the seed dies and a plant grows from that. We see that in the animal world where, when the molecules, the atoms are recycled and become something new after death. There's this cycle of life and death and repetition. That's in a very basic sense. But for us, for people, there's also a sense in which when we sort of put to death, when we sort of let go of, when we sort of free ourselves from those attempts that we have to save ourselves, when we give ourselves permission, which is, in all the ways that Jesus always talked about, when we give ourselves permission to stop striving, to stop trying to overcome that deficit, that lack, that hole, when we embrace that sort of collective vulnerability that we all have, something happens. There's a kind of freedom. We emerge anew, resurrect perhaps. And in that vulnerability, in that sort of embrace of a kind of loss, there's a solidarity. We find that, we're actually made free to be with and for the people who are different than us. We can be with and for those who are other than us, those who perhaps frighten us or who scare us, perhaps even, and I want to be really sensitive here because there's very healthy boundaries to be had within this, but even with those who have hurt us, okay? When it comes to the anxieties that we experience as an adult, salvation isn't a magic incantation. It's not this thing that we come to through ritual. It's not this thing that we experience and we'll know that we've experienced because we arrive at a certain kind of wholeness. Rather, salvation is resurrection. It involves a death. It involves a letting go. And it involves a vulnerability, a relational vulnerability, that then frees us to rise again as something new, something different. There's continuity in the same way that there was continuity. The disciples were kind of able to recognize Jesus, but then, there was also scars that they could, recognize and experience. But then there's a discontinuity. There's something divine about it, and it's hard. It's not something that we embrace naturally. It's something that requires us to maybe lean in supernaturally, all right? All of our instincts cause us to run from death. But Paul's logic in the Romans Road is that if we embrace it, embrace a kind of letting go, embrace a kind of loss, then on the other side of that is something genuinely new. It might not save us from climate change, at least in the short term. It might not magically make you a better parent, make me a better parent. It might not save your kids from hopefully having the money to afford therapy as adults. And it might not take a bite out of crime, at least in the short term. But what it will allow you to have is the grace for yourself and the grace for others to get back up and to continue to strive, struggle, forgive, love, and live in this messy existence, this messy experience that we call humanity. All right. I've gone way too long. My apologies for that. I said 35 minutes, and the clock tells me I've gone 43. Ugh. I'll do better next time. But thank you for being here. My prayer for you as we leave is that you would give yourself the permission, which is all that grace is, the permission to not be whole, the permission to not define yourself by your inability to save yourself, and to see in that vulnerability that raises the very thing that you share in common with every other person in this room and every other person that you're going to meet. And it's that shared vulnerability, that shared solidarity that might save us. Thanks for being here.
Stand and join us in song.
So forgetful, but you always remind me you're the only one who brings me peace. You're the only one who brings me peace. I'm so forgetful, but you always remind me you're the only one who brings me peace. You're the only one who brings me peace. So I come, Lord, I come. I come, Lord, I come to tell you I love you, to tell you I need you, to tell you there's no better place for me than in your arms, to tell you I'm sorry for running in circles, for placing my focus on the ways not on your face. 'Cause you're the only one who brings me peace. You're the only one who brings me peace. I'm so forgetful, but you always remind me you're the only one who brings me peace. You're the only one who brings me peace. So I come, Lord, I come. I come, Lord, I come to tell you I love you, to tell you I need you, to tell you there's no better place for me than in your arms, to tell you I'm sorry for running in circles, focus on the ways, not on your face. You're the only one who brings me peace. You're the only one who brings me peace. I'm so forgetful, but you always remind me. You're the only one who brings me peace. You're the only one who brings me peace. Thank you all so much for coming. We look forward to seeing you next weekend.